Here you see the Reichstag, the German House of Parliament in Berlin, which has been seriously destroyed by fire. The main hall in which the deputies conducted their debates has suffered most from the conflagration. And after the general election which is about to take place, Parliament will have to find a temporary home elsewhere. Flames are no respecters of persons, and President Hindenburg's own chair was also destroyed. Hitler, now Chancellor, has announced that the fire was the work of communists and was intended to be the signal for a Bolshevist uprising throughout the country. In consequence, Germany has been placed under a system of martial law, a decree having been signed which aims at the total destruction of communism.
On the night of the 27th or 28th of February 1933, the Reichstag, the German parliament, caught fire, causing extensive damage. The fire was caused by arson. Marinus van der Lubbe was arrested at the scene. He was later tried and executed, although he had not committed an offence which carried the death penalty. Until his execution, van der Lubbe maintained that he had set the Reichstag on fire alone. His claim of acting alone seemed improbable to even many contemporaries. What caused the fire may be the cause for discussion, but its effects are not. Within hours, on the 28th of February 1933, the Reich President's decree for the protection of people and state, best known as the Reichstag Fire Decree, was issued. This effectively suspended the fundamental rights enshrined in the Weimar Constitution and paved the way for the legalized persecution of the National Socialist German Workers' Party's political opponents by the police and the SA. As a result, thousands of people were arrested and held in what was then termed wild concentration camps. This in turn led to the blatantly fraudulent elections of the following week, where the opponents of the National Socialists were harassed, arrested, and unable to participate in the democratic process. The Reichstag Fire Decree was a crucial step in the establishment of the National Socialist dictatorship. However, there is one commonly held belief I'd like to shatter right now. The Reichstag Fire Decree was not the beginning of the end of democracy in Germany. There had been already two other movements to do this. On the 4th of February 1933, within days of Hitler being appointed Chancellor, President Paul von Hindenburg signed the Ordinance for the Protection of the German People, which was something prepared by the previous government. On the 17th of February 1933, Hermann Göring issued what was to become known as the Shooting Decree, allowing not just the regular police, but also their auxiliaries, by which time include the SA, the SS, and the Stahlhelm, to use their weapons without fear of recourse. However, it is the Reichstag Fire Decree which permitted a wave of arrests. With all this in mind, I think a little historical background is needed to set the scene. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany on the 30th of January 1933. In my opinion, the number one reason why this happened was not because he was the leader of the largest political party in the Reichstag. As with less than 1/3 of all votes cast, he was not in a position to form a government. The reason why Adolf Hitler was appointed was more to do with a corruption scandal involving members of the establishment elite in Weimar Germany called the Eastern Aid Program. I've done a separate video on that and the link is provided below. Sometimes I look at how this happened and it is almost as though it was planned, because the steps leading to dictatorship appear to fall very neatly into place. The very first step was being appointed Chancellor, albeit with a minority of Nazis in the cabinet. Hitler needed a general election, but he needed an election that he could fiddle up front by denying rights to his opponents. After all, the Nazi Party had lost 2 million votes in the election of November 1932 when compared to the previous election. The Reichstag Fire Decree, which was released only 6 days before the election, is clear, but there was an initial step which came on the 4th of February 1933, and that is called the Decree of the Reich President for the Protection of the German People. This emergency decree was issued by Reich President Paul von Hindenburg on the basis of Article 48, Paragraph 2 of the Weimar Constitution, which largely suspended the basic constitutional rights of freedom of assembly and freedom of the press. I won't read the entire decree to you, but I will provide you with a link so that you can read it for yourself. The link is in the description. However, I will give you a summary. The decree stipulated that all meetings and processions had to be reported to the local police authority at least 48 hours in advance, and that these meetings could be banned. Furthermore, they could be banned if speakers called for disobedience to laws or insulted the state in any way. The police was empowered to break up any meeting. It needs to be remembered that the SA was given police powers, so therefore the Nazi Party itself could legally break up meetings of any opposition party, and of course they could interpret the words spoken in any meeting in any way that they saw fit. Printed materials could be seized if they had content likely to endanger public safety or order. This, of course, included newspapers and magazines, which could be banned, and the ban could include all publications from the same publisher. So for a big company, this was a major risk, probably not worth taking. And imagine if you were the editor of a small paper in a small town, but part of a large media empire. Are you going to risk the wrath of your boss in having your boss's papers banned just because you reported on a meeting of a party that was opposed to the Nazis? Of course, an appeal could be made. Theoretically, this was still the Weimar Republic, a constitutional democracy, but the appeal had to be made to the Reich Minister of the Interior, and that was Wilhelm Frick, and he was a Nazi. The state had also the right to prohibit or confiscate collections of money. So once more, if you're in a party which doesn't like the Nazis, you had a whip round, well, the state could actually confiscate that. And as far as you know, that money could end up in Nazi coffers. So what did they do? They didn't collect money. Punishment was imprisonment for not less than 3 months, except where there were mitigating circumstances, in which case imprisonment could be for not less than 1 month. A fine could also be imposed. But I don't think the punishment was the problem. I think it was what the consequences were that was the problem. The other consequences. Franz von Papen had suggested that the conservatives in the cabinet would be able to control Hitler, as they had the majority, but this decree makes it clear that within the first few days Hitler had outmaneuvered them by having his man Wilhelm Frick as the Minister of the Interior and his man Hermann Göring as the head of the police in Prussia. This decree, however, had been planned earlier. It was nothing to do with the Nazis, in fact. Kurt von Schleicher, Hitler's predecessor in the office of Reichschancellor, threatened the Communist Party in a radio speech on the 15th of December 1932 with the issuance of a tough decree. In this speech, he said, "I would like to warn the professional troublemakers, as well as a certain provocative press that poisons the atmosphere, that such a decree is ready in the drawer, and is in fact an excellent piece of work in its completeness. I hope that the use of this decree will not be necessary. I also hope that it will not be necessary to deploy the army. But I also don't want to leave the anti-state communist movement in any doubt that the Reich government will not shy away from draconian exceptional provisions against the Communist Party if it should abuse the loosening of the reins to incite the population to hatred. So, the decree was in the drawer, and all Hitler had to do was to open the drawer and pull it out. Thus, in the run-up to the elections that were to be held 4 weeks later, the Nazis could stop the opposition parties holding meetings and collecting funds, and could ban any publication which they liked. And this, of course, could mean those publications reporting on what was happening in the country, or even just the policies of other parties. The Reichstag Fire Decree was to come 3 weeks later, but already within 1 week the Nazis had sufficiently undermined the Weimar Constitution to be able to bring about a dictatorship thanks to a few already wealthy landowners who were trying to cover up their misuse of government funds through the Eastern Aid Programme. 13 years and 3 weeks after the German parliament burned down, the subject of the Reichstag fire came up in court at Nuremberg when Justice Robert Jackson questioned Hermann Göring on the events of the 27th to the 28th of February 1933. In this video, I shall quote directly from the trial transcript and analyse the responses. As always with my videos, I'll show you some photographs as well as video material which I have made of what the places look like today. So now it's the 18th of March 1946. Justice Robert H. Jackson, Chief U.S. Prosecutor, is going to attempt to show that the fire was an instrument in the pre-planned repression of the other political parties. He's going to try to show that there was possible Nazi authorship or complicity and the deliberate exploitation of the fire to destroy the Weimar Constitution. Göring is going to respond aggressively, but with a very consistent line, never budging on the core points. Jackson opens by framing the fire as the trigger for mass repression. He says, "There was a great purge following that fire. Many people were arrested and many people were killed." Göring immediately narrows the claim. "I don't know of a single case where a man was killed because of the Reichstag fire, except van der Lubbe." He stressed that the others who were tried for the fire, Dimitrov, Popov, Tanev and Torger, were acquitted at Leipzig. Arrests were relatively few in direct connection with the fire. The broader sweep was aimed at communist functionaries under a pre-existing plan, not at random opponents. This lets him concede repression while denying that the fire itself was used as a legal pretext for indiscriminate killing. Jackson then presses the obvious point. If the arrests were already planned, the fire looked very convenient. You had lists of communists already prepared at the time of the Reichstag fire. Göring calmly admits the lists. We had always drawn up fairly complete lists of communist functionaries who were to be arrested. But he immediately severs any casual link. That had nothing to do with the fire in the German Reichstag. Jackson follows up. They were immediately put into execution after the Reichstag fire. Göring again blends admission with exculpation. Contrary to my intention of postponing this action, the Führer ordered that same night that the arrests should follow immediately. So therefore, Göring admits pre-planned mass arrests and that the fire precipitated their execution, but frames this as Hitler's acceleration of a lawful police plan, not a conspiracy around the fire. Now, that is the admission that modern historians use to show Nazi exploitation of the fire, even if authorship of the fire isn't clear. Jackson then nails down the chronology. You and the Fuhrer met at the fire, didn't you? That's right. And there, you decided to arrest all the communists. Goering insists that this was merely the moment of implementation of a pre-existing decision. He says, the decision for their arrest had been reached some days before. It simply meant that on the night they were immediately arrested. On the Reichstag Fire Decree of the 28th of February 1933, suspending key civil liberties, Jackson asks, and then the next morning the decree was presented to President von Hindenburg, wasn't it? Goering, I believe so, yes. So Goering's line is that the decree was a constitutional emergency measure in response to a real communist danger and not a long-prepared blueprint for dictatorship. Jackson next introduces the alleged essay Confession by Karl Ernst, which links Goering personally to the arson. Now, at the time of the fire, Karl Gustav Ernst was the leader of the essay group Berlin-Brandenburg. He'd been a member of the Reichstag since the previous year. I have this picture in which he appears on the 31st of January 1933. Just slightly back from him on our right is Albert Speer. Then we have on our right Count Helldorf, who was a vicious anti-Semite, but he turned on Hitler and was involved in the 20th of July coup attempt and was executed for it. Then there's Joseph Goebbels and Karl Hanke. Karl Ernst was just leaving on his honeymoon on the 30th of June 1934 when he was arrested and later shot, no doubt much to the chagrin of his wife, who would have missed her once-in-a-lifetime cruise. Karl Ernst is said to have been the homosexual lover of Ernst Röhm, but it was very nice that Röhm actually turned up at his wedding. Anyway, I've done a little bit more on that in a different video. Let's not go on that there now. The claim that Ernst was responsible for the Reichstag fire was first made in the White Book on the Executions of the 30th of June 1934, which was published in Paris in the autumn of 1934, a few months after Ernst's murder, where an alleged confession that he started the fire was later exposed as a forgery produced by the communist publisher Willy Münzenberg. Nevertheless, Ernst's responsibility for the fire was widely accepted as the most likely explanation until the late 1950s. Hans Bernd Gersivius said in 1946 that his former superior, Arthur Niebuhr, the head of the criminal police, had told him during the investigations into the case that he'd found that Ernst had organised the fire. Ernst is reputed to have said in 1933, "If I say I started the fire, then I'm a damn fool. If I say no, I'm a damn liar." In pre-trial questioning, Hermann Göring admitted during an interrogation by US Prosecutor Robert H, when asked about Ernst's possible involvement in the Reichstag fire. Yes, this is the man I thought of if any other hand beside van der Lubbe was involved. As far as Ernst is concerned, I believe anything's possible. During further questioning by Kempner, Göring added, "I really wonder what interest Ernst could have had in this. I suspect he said we want to set it on fire, then spread the word that it was the communists. I can only imagine that the SA believed in this context that it could then play a greater role in government." In court, Göring continued to deny his responsibility. Jackson: "It is known to you that Ernst made a statement confessing that these three burned the Reichstag and that you and Goebbels planned and furnished the incendiary materials." Göring brushes it aside. "I don't know of any statement by the SA leader Ernst, but I do know of some fairy tale published in the foreign press." What about the subterranean passage? There was such a passage from the Reichstag building to your house, was there not? The two are connected by a passage along which the wagons run which carry the coke for the central heating. So therefore, Göring has admitted the physical possibility of doing the fire by him through the tunnel, but he denies any involvement and characterises the Ernst story as foreign propaganda. Jackson then points out that Ernst was killed without trial in the Röhm Purge of the 30th of June 1934. He says, "Shortly after this, Ernst was killed without a trial and without a chance to tell his story, was he not?" Göring counters with a simple timeline. The Reichstag fire was in February 1933. Ernst was shot on the 30th of June 1934. He therefore had a year and a quarter in which he could have made statements regarding the Reichstag fire. So, this is really how Göring answered throughout the trial. Concede the killing, deny the motive. Jackson asks then, have you ever boasted of burning the Reichstag building, even by way of joking? Göring admits one joke, but crucially not a confession. Göring, I made a joke that I should be competing with Nero dressed in a red toga while the Reichstag was burning. That was the joke. He then adds the self-serving flourish that he almost perished in the flames, which he calls unfortunate for Germany, but it would have been fortunate for its enemies. Jackson, you never stated then that you burned the Reichstag. Göring, no. Nazi Party politician Hermann Rauschning claimed that Göring confided responsibility to him. Göring, if I'd set fire to the Reichstag, I'd have told only a close circle of confidence, not a man I didn't know. Given that Rauschning later published a book on his conversations with Hitler, which it turned out didn't actually happen, I think we can believe Göring on this point. Jackson's strongest shot is the affidavit of General Franz Halder, former Chief of the Army General Staff. He reads an affidavit. At a luncheon on Hitler's birthday in 1942, Göring allegedly said, "The only one who really knows the Reichstag is I, for I set fire to it," and then he slapped his thigh. Göring detonates in response. "This conversation didn't take place, that's utter nonsense." Then he ridicules Halder personally. Halder's bad memory is also what let him down in military matters, is offered as the explanation. This is an absolute textbook counterattack. He denied the event, he attacked the witnesses' competence and motives, and avoided engaging with the substance of the allegation. So Jackson was unable to get beyond Halder's affidavit to a direct confession. The tribunal hears the allegation, but also Göring's sharp counter-denial. So, what did Jackson achieve? Göring confirmed pre-prepared communist arrest list, and he conceded that the Reichstag Fire Decree was presented to Hindenburg the next morning and that mass arrests followed at once. Now, Whitney R. Harris, who was one of Jackson's colleagues, later noted that this line of questioning supported the prosecution's thesis that the Nazis used the fire to destroy civil liberties under a veneer of legality. But on the authorship of the fire itself, I think we'd have to agree that Jackson didn't break Göring. There's no document showing Göring ordered or planned the arson, and the key incriminating evidence was witness-based from Rauschning, Halder, an alleged Ernst confession, and Göring could always respond with, "That's a lie, that's nonsense," and then counterattack the witness. Jackson's style of cross, long discursive questions letting Göring explain, gave Göring space to deliver speeches, which he used very skillfully. I've heard it called one of the worst high-profile cross-examinations, precisely because Göring often looked as though he were in command. But at the end, there is clear evidence that the fire was ruthlessly exploited. But there is, and I've got to insist on this, there is no proof by criminal trial standards that Göring ordered or organised it. And on this, he was absolutely unbroken. Now, if I could take a little bit through the historiography of this event. So many people after the war argued that Marinus van der Lubbe acted alone and the Nazi just seized the opportunity. Many historians, which would include Ian Kershaw and possibly Richard Evans, treated this as the dominant consensus. Van der Lubbe lit the fire, Nazis exploited it. And in that light, Göring's denial of Nazi authorship fits the theory that as to who lit the match. But his own admissions at Nuremberg provide some of the best primary evidence for how the Nazis used the fire to destroy the Republic. However, from the 1990s onwards, the situation changed. There were newly available Gestapo court and police files, and they argue that the lone arsonist story emerged partly from post-war ex-Gestapo efforts to sanitize their records. SA and Nazi operatives may have prepared and assisted the fire, with van der Lubbe used as a convenient front, and the pattern of evidence, the timing the fire spread, the witness statements which were suppressed or later killed, and this all points to Nazi involvement. From this perspective, Goering's Nuremberg testimony is seen as a carefully constructed alibi, plus admissions only when documents already forced him to concede something, such as those of the pre-planned arrests. The Halder anecdote that Goering shouted at a 1942 lunch that he'd set fire to his thigh slapping fits the narrative, although it remains uncorroborated beyond Halder's own word. So, what can we believe? Now, I think that the bottom line would have to be this. Goering denied any role. He reaffirmed the communist culprit narrative. He admitted pre-planned arrest and the immediate emergency decree, and he fended off every attempt to tie him personally to arson. Well, what can we say? Well, perhaps I could now take you on a deeper examination of the case using some more recent discoveries. On the 26th of July 2019, the Hannoverische Allgemeine Zeitung broke a story that suggested we may have misunderstood what caused the Reichstag fire of the 27th of May 1933. Initially, it was believed by many to have been caused by the Nazis as an excuse to declare a state of emergency. Later, blame switched to Marinus van der Lubbe as the lone perpetrator who caused a fire which the Nazis then exploited for their own purposes in order to curtail civil rights. However, the new evidence published in the Hannoverische Allgemeine Zeitung could suggest the initial theory may have been the correct one. On the evening of the 27th of February 1933, 4 weeks after Hitler was appointed Chancellor, a fire broke out in the Reichstag. Here is a news report from the following day. Fire broke out in the Reichstag shortly after 9 in the evening and burned so fiercely that within an hour the main hall in which representatives of the German people meet when Parliament is in session was completely destroyed. Flames leaping from the great glass dome surmounting the building could be seen for miles around and attracted huge crowds to the scene. Police in full force on horseback and on foot kept the crowd back, while all the fire brigades in Berlin poured water onto the flames. High ladders were run up the walls and illuminated by searchlights. It is believed, says an Exchange Berlin telegram, that the fire was due to arson as it commenced at 5 or 6 different points simultaneously. A man was arrested in the building. He was found clad only in trousers. A Reuters telegram says that the fire was started by documents which were set alight in 6 different places. Apart from the man arrested, there were several other people in the building, although the Reichstag is not in session. The wildest rumours were circulating last night, adds Reuters. One was that secret orders had been issued to Nazi stormtroopers to create a Bartholomew Night, when all opponents known to the Nazis were to be disposed of. Although the police asserted the communists are responsible, some people think that the fire may have been started by irresponsible Nazis with the object of provoking trouble. The fires were extinguished at 10:45 in the evening. The session hall presents a scene of desolation with all the deputies' seats, public and press galleries destroyed. The police, suspecting the conflagration to be the first of a series of communist acts of terrorism, have arrested a number of communist leaders. A Dutchman named van der Lubbe aged 24, is said to have confessed that he started the fire, but denied that he was acting as anyone's agent. The police found a rag steeped in petrol as they entered the building, and the arrested man's cap was found close to other firing material. Herr Hitler, Herr Göring, Herr von Papen, and other prominent persons entered the building whilst it was still burning, and Herr Göring, President of the Reichstag and Commissarial Minister for the Interior in Prussia, took command of the police. Now that was what was believed at the time. That report dates from the following day. So, more details came out later, and that's what we're going to examine right now. As pointed out in the aforementioned article, a number of Nazis were nearby and turned up at the scene of the conflagration. On arrival, Hermann Göring appeared to have the game plan already worked out. He loudly exclaimed, "This is the beginning of the communist uprising. They will start now. Not a minute is to be wasted." And not a minute was wasted in rounding up people who were opposed to National Socialism. Goebbels is also assumed to have been involved with the arson. On the 27th of February 1933, in the evening, he was at home in the western part of Berlin, dining with Hitler. This was quite common. Hitler then did not have a home in Berlin, so he used to go around to the Goebbels place quite often. During dinner, Ernst Herfenstangl rang and said that the Reichstag was burning, and then Goebbels and Hitler drove very quickly to the building. What is suspicious is that despite the general election slated for the following week, Hitler, Göring and Goebbels were all conveniently in Berlin at the same time. Suspicious note, I didn't say that that is proof. On the 15th of February 1933, Admiral Magnus von Levetzow, who had been a Nazi member of parliament since January 1931, was appointed head of the Berlin police. He replaced lawyer and DVP party member Kurt Melcher. Von Levetzow got to work immediately, arranging several searches of Communist Party offices, something his predecessor probably would not have done. On the 24th of February 1933, the Communist HQ was again searched, and 2 days later, the government news agency Conti said that it would be releasing information on the, and I quote, "sinister finds that were made in the bowels of the building," thus hinting that the Communists had tried to hide plans relating to a coup or revolution. The Nazi newspaper Der Angriff promised in its 1st of March 1933 edition to publish the evidence that it had found with all haste, but that was never done. On the 25th of February, an arson attack was made on the old Imperial Palace, which was extinguished. However, contemporary newspapers show a number of arson attacks were made throughout the country, and all were blamed on the Communists. Given that the official line was that this was the beginning of a communist revolution, one might have expected the police or the army to be on standby, but this did not happen. At the time, it was widely believed that the arsonists had entered the Reichstag through the subterranean passage that connects it with the speaker's residence, and the speaker was then Göring. The day after the fire, the Reich President's decree for the protection of the people and the state followed, with which the basic rights from the Weimar Constitution were suspended, and the legal persecution of political opponents was practically no longer subject to any limits whatsoever. As we now know, this was the beginning of the dictatorship. It led directly to the fraudulent elections of the following month, which in turn led to the Enabling Act. In Berlin alone, well over 1,000 Communist Party members were arrested on the night of the fire. Also arrested were Social Democrats and others opposed to National Socialism. As far as I can tell, not a single one knew anything about the origin of the conflagration. 5 people were put on trial for the fire, 4 were acquitted and 1 found guilty. This was Marina van der Lubbe, a labourer from the Netherlands who had been a member of the Communist Party as a teenager. Van der Lubbe had suffered an industrial accident with Lyme in the 1920s, which left him with less than 20% of his sight in both eyes. His industrial compensation was not enough to live off, and he was unable to get anything other than temporary jobs. He spent some time travelling, trying to get into the Soviet Union twice and failing both times. He arrived in Berlin 9 days before the fire and spent time with friends from the far left. For the Nazis, van der Lubbe was the perfect scapegoat. He was arrested at the scene of the fire, he had threatened to start a fire, he was a communist, and he was a foreigner. He was tried in Leipzig, sentenced to death, and executed on the 10th of January 1934 by guillotine, thanks to a law which was passed after the fire. In time, it was accepted by most historians that whereas the Nazis turned the burning of the Reichstag to their advantage, this was in fact the work of one sole person and was done without the knowledge of the National Socialist leadership. In 1955, an affidavit was sworn by former SA man Hans Martin Lennings. He declared that in the late afternoon of the 27th of February 1933, on the orders of SA leader Karl Ernst, he went to a garden restaurant called Schwarze Kater or Schwarze Katzen in Berlin-Mahlsdorf. 2 other SA men, whom Lennings did not want to name, were also there. They met Max Becker, who had previously been a member of the Communist Red Front Fighters League and now served as a police spy. He told the 3 SA men to pick up a man from the SA hospital in Lützowstrasse and bring him to the Reichstag, a journey of less than 1 kilometer. When he saw the newspapers later, he realized that his passenger was Marinus van der Lubbe. This journey took place between 8 and 9 in the evening. On arrival, they noticed that there was a peculiar burning smell and that faint puffs of smoke also wafted through the rooms. Lennings was born in 1904 in what is now Wuppertal, and as a child lived in Hanover. He was involved with the far right from the mid-1920s, and he knew Ernst Röhm. After being hospitalized in 1930 following a street fight, he was visited by Hitler. He was arrested during the 1930s, spent time in prison for anti-Nazi comments. He died in 1962. He claimed that he made his affidavit on the advice of a priest and that his declaration was drafted by a notary in 1955 to be used in any potential retrial of Marinus van der Lubbe. After the Reichstag fire, he and his comrades protested against van der Lubbe's arrest because van der Lubbe could not possibly have been the arsonist since the building was already on fire when they arrived. According to Lennings, those in the car were taken into protective custody and had to sign a declaration that they knew nothing about the fire. He was released on the orders of Ernst Röhm. Once more, according to Lennings, almost everyone was later shot who had belonged to the inner circle of those involved in the Reichstag fire. He was warned and fled to Czechoslovakia, returning to Germany later. Unfortunately, we do not have the names of the other people who were in the car at the time. However, many SA were killed during the Night of the Long Knives the following year, such as Karl Ernst, the person who had ordered him to go to the restaurant. A number of experts have said that van der Lubbe could not have caused the conflagration with a few firelighters. It is also hard to believe that somebody who was as visually impaired as he was could have negotiated a 5-meter high balustrade to get into the Reichstag, passing through a window which was also surrounded by a 2-meter deep trench that was secured with barbed wire. This window, we can see in the photograph, is the one often said to have been the one he climbed through, but that is not the case. This is where the firefighters gained entry. According to his testimony, he got through the window to our right of this one, and I was unable to locate a photograph of that one. In fact, I haven't been the only person to look for it. Other people have failed too. Based on his own description, entry via a door, conveniently open, seems to be more likely. He had 4 firelighters which he claims to have used en route to the debating chamber. At the debating chamber, he said that he used his jacket to set the velvet curtains alight. He did all this within 15 minutes in a building he had never been in before. During questioning and at his trial, he was quite apathetic to the consequences, and suggestion has been made that he was drugged. He could have accepted sole responsibility, of course, as an act of bravado to encourage German workers to resist the Nazis. However, there are other holes in Lenning's argument. There is no record of a garden restaurant where he claims to have received his instructions with a name similar to Schwarze Katte or Schwarze Katzen in Berlin-Mahlsdorf. Furthermore, van der Lubbe was not taken by car to the Reichstag, but walked there around midday and then hung around waiting for night to fall, and there are several witnesses to this. On the other hand, several witnesses did see a car of the type Lenning's could have used parked at the Reichstag entrance, which could have been used for entry. Could he have picked up someone else and later got him confused with van der Lubbe? In 1936-1937, 2 doctors prepared psychiatric reports on Lenning's on behalf of the Heredity Health Court at the Leipzig District Court, which designated him a psychopath, suffering from anxiety disorders, epilepsy, and memory loss. This report was carried out with a view to possible sterilization of somebody suffering from mental illness. An analysis in late 2019 of these findings by psychiatrist Frank Schneider for the German magazine Der Spiegel concluded that Lenning's statements cannot be dismissed as lies in principle, but there's a lot of evidence that he accused himself of an act in which he was not involved. Now, my own opinion, and I could well be wrong, is that van der Lubbe was put up to this by a Nazi agent who had infiltrated the communist circle of the Dutchmen, and the Nazis had previously ensured that the building would go up in flames appropriately once the firelighters were used. Max Becker, for example, who allegedly met Lenning's, was a police agent and had been a communist. White phosphorus and oil residue were found in the Reichstag chamber, and that, I believe, was the reason for the fire. I'm thus suggesting a possible conspiracy. Nonetheless, most historians continue to believe that Marinus van der Lubbe acted alone. Now, to sum up, if Göring were involved, then why did he deny it? As he didn't deny that he'd been associated with the plot to overthrow the democratic system in Germany. I believe that he must have been involved, but there's no evidence to back this up. However, there is plenty of evidence to back up the claim that it wasn't just the work of Marinus van der Lubbe and that he was using as an excuse. Is it possible that this was the work of the SA operating behind Göring and possibly even Hitler's back? Perhaps afterwards they felt that they'd gone too far? I don't know. Thank you very much for listening to the video. I've also published a number of videos on the life of Hermann Göring, as well as on other aspects of Nazi Germany. My specialization in history is the Holocaust. I upload every day with a shorts video, and there are documentary style videos like this on Tuesdays and Fridays. I do the longer ones on the Fridays, shorter ones on the Tuesdays. I always upload at 2000 hours Central European time, so that's 1900 hours in the United Kingdom and different times in different places. I live in Poland and Germany. I sometimes also do live talks. I try to be present when the videos premiere, which gives you a chance to chat in real time with me and other users, although because of my work and the fact I have to travel, I can't always be at the premieres. These videos feature original research as I can speak various languages. I can also offer channel membership, which costs £5 or €6 or $6. This gives access to currently over 800 videos which are for members only. So if you're interested in real researched history made from the locations where these things happened, without the use of sensationalized language, fiction, or artificial intelligence, then this is the place to be.